Hi, I'm Dave Kassler, and I'm here with a tour of my airplane, which is a RANS S6ES, manufactured around 2013, and I'm the third owner of it, a proud owner, and it's the Coyote 2 model. It's a simple single wing, single propeller, non-adjustable, with the non-retractable landing gear, and yet it's a pretty nice little machine. I guess a lot of people would call an airplane like this a trainer, meaning that it is very well behaved, very easy to fly, doesn't do a lot of fancy things, although this does pretty good. So we're going to start here at the front and work our way around, and I want to show you some of the things. Now, there are three basic ways an airplane can maneuver. It can go to the left or right, which is moving it about the vertical axis or the yaw axis, and that's done with the rudders. Or it can go up or down, like this, and that's done with the so-called elevators. And then it can tilt right to left, and it does that with the ailerons. Now, it seems rather strange in this day and age, since every maneuver that the aircraft does is a combination of those three, that we haven't somehow automated that process. There was one attempt by an aircraft manufacturer just post-war to do that with some mechanical linkages, but it created some problems. But in any event, those are the ways that you control an airplane. This is the prop. The prop is made by Senesex and is a composite, I believe, and just the two-bladed prop on the thing. It is turned directly by the engine. It's connected to the crankshaft of the engine. As the engine turns, this turns. Okay? This is a little spot that you use every time you do a pre-flight. You check the oil. Now that seems maybe a little odd for those of you who drive your cars and check your oil once every several months. This thing has got an engine in it made, but it's a large engine, 120 horsepower, and it needs to have its oil changed about every 25 to 30 hours. Now, can you imagine a car needing its oil changed that often? It's crazy. Furthermore, it is not fuel injected, it's carbureted. And the carburetor, oddly enough, is down here at the bottom of the engine, way down under here. Now, on the front, we have these air scoops that allow air in to cool the engine. It's an air-cooled engine. This engine has 6 cylinders, so this cools half, this cools the other half, and there's temperature gauges on those in the aircraft. This air under here goes in to the oil cooler. We have a capture of air here, which can be heated or go in to ventilate the cabin. The nose wheel on this thing is turned, oddly enough, using the rudder pedals. When you turn the rudder pedals back and forth, it turns that wheel. So on the ground, you're steering with your feet. And one of the things you have to do as land is get that thing lined up right so you won't get squirted off to one side or the other if you've got the, wait a moment for that aircraft to take off. By the way, we are at Delta Blake Field in Delta, Colorado. That's Kilo Alpha Juliet Zulu. This tug right here is, I bought it and then we modified it to work on this airplane. So this allows you to tow the thing in and out of the hangar for takeoff and so on. Let's go over on this side here. Take a look at the glass on here. This is not glass, it's plastic. So you need to treat it very carefully so it doesn't scratch. I've got some special liquid that can be used to clean it that won't scratch it. It's one piece of plastic. Noted that it is riveted in place along here. It's all riveted. And right there is the logo for the aircraft, the Howling Coyote. Now the aircraft, except for the parts over the engine, is made of fabric. That's fabric. It's sailcloth, as in sailboats. And it has been covered with chemicals. It's called doping, and to get the right color and everything. Now the wings of the aircraft, of course, the heart of the aircraft, well, I guess the beating heart of the aircraft is the engine, but certainly the strong back of the aircraft are the wings. These wings can be folded up, but are not designed for that to happen often. These wings have been folded once that I know of, and there were a couple little tears in the canvas, things that needed to be fixed. The doors pop up, make it much easier to get in and out like this. And again, they're very thin. It says very, very thin plexiglass, and they latch in a couple places, and you don't open them in flight. Airplanes are not designed to have them opened in flight. There's a big sign here that says experimental. And that's what class aircraft this is. It's an experimental aircraft, meaning that it's not type registered, but rather is built individually. In this case, this is an experimental amateur built aircraft, meaning someone bought a kit for Morans, who are in Hays, Kansas, and put the kit together. The way the rules and regulations work for that is that the labor, the value of the labor put into the aircraft by the owner must exceed 50% of the total value of the labor. So the factory can basically half put it together. They do that by manufacturing the parts, and then you put it together yourself. This is my GoPro camera holder here. The wings are actually, the wings are supported two places. Here, at this point, and then of course, here where they attach to the fuselage. That means there's a considerable upthrust point here, and so the wing spar, which is about here, has to be able to take that even in gusty conditions. Okay? So the bottom of the wing is fairly straight. Now, the wing picks up lift from the way it's bent up here on top, but it's also tilted up a little bit to give you a little bit of extra lift. If you were to tie this down outside to a tie down, this is the strap where that would go. Now, all the bolts that are in here are nylock type bolts, meaning the bolt has a nylon insert in it that when it is turned, it's very difficult to turn and almost impossible for it to vibrate loose. And that's why they're this way. The only other way of attaching things on an aircraft like this are rivets. This is a rivet right here. It's a very small one, but a rivet nonetheless. These rivets can't unscrew in flight. They will stay riveted. It's the same with these nylocks. So these are the two types of connectors, nylocks and rivets, and they're used in abundance on both sides. Moving over here along the wing, we encounter what's called the pitot tube. This is the, it's just a tube sticking out, and the air pressure from traveling, when we're traveling about, out in the air and you're doing 70, 80 miles an hour, there's a certain amount of air pressure created here because it's sticking into the wind, and that goes to an instrument inside the cab that reads air speed, okay? This right here is a fuel vent. The fuel vent is at a little angle here, so it catches a little bit of air that provides just enough pressure to keep the two tanks from swapping too much gas back and forth and starting to spill out. This end of the wing cover here is tilted at an angle so that the air hitting this can go up over like this and still hit the ailerons. This right here is an interesting device. This is the left light, which means it's the port side, so it's going to have a red light in it. But this blade right here is a transmitter. It's an antenna, and this is what's called ADSB out. And it grabs information from the regular transponder in there by listening to it on the radio. No wires involved. And it will transmit all the ADSB information out. And because it's around 10 megahertz, it does not take a very big antenna and does that over here. This is the way a lot of retrofit ADSB installations look like. They've got this fitting in here. Now, if we come over here and look at the back of the tail, we'll see the business end. These are the ailerons, and note the use of a lot of French words in talking about airplanes. The empennage, the fuselage, and so on, ailerons. But this right here, when this goes up like this, it's going to force this down. But notice on the other side over there, that one goes down. When this one goes down, that one goes up. They operate opposite each other. So this turns the aircraft in its roll axis, like that. And one of the things I do in pre-flight is make sure that these bolts are all there. They're another way of fastening. They've got what's called a crown nut, and the crown nut has a cotter pin in it, okay, to here, and then under here is the mechanism for pushing that back and forth. This right here is a flap. Now what a flap does, flaps work in unison rather than opposite each other. So if I were to put in a notch of flaps, this would come down, which would cause the whole wing to go down like this, which increases the angle on the wing, which causes it to slow down because it adds drag, but it also stays in the air more easily. There are 4 settings on the flaps. Off, which is this one, and then we've got one set, 2 sets, 3 sets, okay? And those are the 3 sets. A lot of airplanes have flaps that are basically infinitely variable, but this particular one has those 3 settings. The flaps, again, have the same type of connections. You have to check during pre-flight to make sure that they are there. And then as we go back here, this right in here, I guess would technically be called part of the empennage because the crew cabin ends at this point right here. And what's in back here, there's a little bit of storage on one side, but not too much. Again, fabric. This is the tail. Again, this is made so that this can be disconnected from here and folded up for transport. But normally you would not fold it up. So again, we've got the little fastener with something here to keep that from coming loose. In every case, there's always these little safety features to keep them from coming loose. This, by the way, is the nameplate for the aircraft. It's very difficult to see what was put there because it was engraved very, very lightly. It's got the first owner's name on there. So this is the aircraft tail number right here. It's on the tail, N8053R, or in FCC parlance, November 8053 Romeo. Now, we never use the N on the air because all American aircraft have an N. So this would be 8053 Romeo on first call. But after you've been in an area for a couple of calls, you'll just do 53 Romeo. And that's how you're known to the local traffic. There's the Coyote emblem up there. It's made by a company called RANS, R-A-N-S. They make the kit that this was made from. Now, the way the tail works, the air from the back of the airplane does kind of a twirl, and it comes down on here. And that's what keeps this down, okay, while you're flying. And the way that you determine how much up or down you want is with the elevator. Again, another French word. And this actually, of course, in flight, you're not going to use anywhere near that range, except as you get into the latest stages of landing, you'll be using much of this here. Now, the two of the elevators are connected together. Okay. Now this one over here has a little assembly on it, right here. It's a trim tab. And from the cab, you can make this go up or down. And that sort of sets the neutral point for the aircraft. So whether it's this, here, here, here. It's a way to set that. This is the rudder of the aircraft and determines the yaw axis. Now when you turn, you have to yaw to turn, but you also have to roll. So you can roll and yaw at the same time. Why that can't be one control, I will never figure out. Anyway, here is the rudder. The rudder doesn't move much here because it's connected to the front wheel. And when the front wheel is on the ground, you can't turn that very much. This is the rudder trim. And if you need to move it, you can move it here. We haven't moved it at all. Similarly, under here on the bottom, in the back, this right here is where you would connect a rope to tie it down. We don't tie it down inside the hangar, of course. On this side, we note here it's American-made. American-made air power by RANS. That's their logo there. Now, not much is in here that the ordinary pilot would want to get at, but if you go into this small storage compartment here, you can store up to 30 pounds in there. And there's just not much behind it except structure to hold the wing on. The wing has to be put in the right position to interact with the air from the wing. This is the flap again, and our aileron again. When this goes up, that one goes down. You'll notice also in the cockpit that the stick goes back and forth. Okay, so this isn't much different from the other one, Over there on the wing top, you can see the tank cover for the gasoline tanks. 9 gallons on a side, so a total of 18 gallons. This is just the port side, although that doesn't look green. It's greenish blue because port is green, and this has a strobe light in there too. Again, another fuel tank, so there's another vent for the fuel tank. So coming around here, we're seeing the mirror image of the same thing that we saw over on the other side. Now this brings us full circle outside. So this is the cockpit. There's some people who have trouble with that name for this space because they say cockpits are where cocks fight. And so somehow that must mean aviation supports that. That's ridiculous, of course, but some people think that. There are exposed controls in here, as you can see here. And like this right here, as you move these around, the stick, this button up here, is push to talk for the radio. And if you move it back and forth this way, this moves the ailerons back and forth. You can see them up over there. Now, if you move it this way, this moves the elevators up and down, which you can see in the back. Those get moved up and down there. Now, the rudders are done with the feet down here. We can't push the rudder pedals because the aircraft is stopped and sitting on that front wheel. And if you try and push too hard, you'll actually bend some of the connections in there. Let's look at some of the controls. There's no lights to speak of in the compass. This is a so-called G5. It's a Garmin instrument that tells you how level you are with respect to the horizon. And you turn in here to put whatever the in altimeter is. The most important instruments are at the top, and they descend slightly in importance as you go down. This right here is the airspeed indicator. Okay, rather than say speedometer, it's airspeed indicator, 3 letters, acronym. It's the way everything is with the FAA. There are ranges here from 40 to 80 is the range. It's got a white line, the range at which you can use flaps. Past 80, it's too fast for the flaps. You can go up to 115, and that's as fast as you can go, unless conditions are absolutely perfect, in which case you can go a little higher. Now, the engine on this only goes up to about 2650 RPM, and so it doesn't really go anywhere near that fast. You can coax 100 out of it if you set yourself up just right. We've got a parking brake. You push on the tips of the pedals, and that leaves them there. It's the parking brake is on. That's where the braking is by pushing on the tops of the pedals. You can differentially brake if you want to. In fact, you can completely lock one wheel and just swing around. That gives you your shortest radius turn. Okay, and this is the choke. There is a choke circuit in the engine. The engine is a Jabiru 3300. I'm not sure it's Gen 4, might be Gen 3. Okay, and then we have this, which shows us level, and it shows the altitude here, shows the speed over here, although that's not calibrated to this. That's one of the things that's open to do. This right here tells you how level you are, that ball between those two lines. The idea is to keep it there, okay? This here, ground speed. The ground speed in knots. The ground speed in knots. And so, now the ground speed isn't much use really while you're flying, because you're flying in the air, you're not flying on the ground. So you need the ground speed just gives you a relative idea. I mean, it's actual true ground speed. This right here tells you the brown is ground and the blue is the sky. And so it tells you where your horizon is. So if you get disoriented, you can always look right at that and figure that out. Now, one of the things that I do is often fly with the instrument in this position right here. This is a compass, a gyro compass. It reads magnetic degrees, but it is not a magnetic compass. And this tells you your actual track that you're tracking, where you are actually going. So if you're pointed this way and you've got a real strong side wind from this direction, it's going to push your aircraft this way. This will show you the actual track made good. It's a very nice little instrument. This thing up here, which is a little hard to see because of the way the sun is set on it here, is a true magnetic compass. That is actually a magnetic compass, and it will give you the magnetic bearing, meaning the direction the airplane is pointed. Okay, not necessarily the track made good. If you want to see the track made good, look at the track over here. So we have an intercom between the passenger and the pilot, and either one can turn the button to turn on the radio. Otherwise, they just talk to each other. This over here is the master switch. These are the magnetos. Now, here's another thing about these old engines. These old engines actually use magnetos. Magnetos have not been used in cars since the 1930s, but we are still using magnetos in flying today. It's just the community is very change averse and doesn't want to change it. Now the advantage is it's got two sets of magnetos. Each set has got one spark plug in each cylinder. So that means each cylinder has two spark plugs. So if you lose a magneto, like that one, you can fly on. And to turn off the engine, you have to turn off both of them. That's why there are great big switches here that are not going to easily be turned off. If, for some reason, all the power goes off in the system, the magnetos are independent, and you can continue to fly, even if the battery power and everything like that is turned off. Now, so we have our airspeed indicator here. This right here is the vertical speed indicator. It's a lagging indicator, but it does tell you whether you're going up and down and by how much. That's 500 feet per minute, 1,000 feet per minute, and so on in either direction. About 500 feet a minute is about what you want to do in this airplane. This right here is supposed to be an autopilot of some sort, but it's not connected to anything, so I'm going to take it out. What I am going to put in its place is a a tilt and slip indicator that'll go right in here. And I see this little ball right there. It's not quite calibrated right. We're sitting absolutely level in the hangar, and that ball is off. It should be right in the middle there. Okay, and this right here is the altimeter, and it works like a clock. So it means we're 5,000 feet plus 100. Since we don't have the radio on, I don't know the actual, because they put on the radio what the altimeter should be set to. Another way to do it is simply to set it to field altitude. And then you can read the barometric pressure off of there too. Okay, we've got a radio right here. The radio, it's made by ICOM, which makes ham radio gear. And 122.8 is the frequency that pilots use to talk to each other around this airport, which is an uncontrolled airport. So pilots coordinate with each other in a very structured way. 134.0 is the so-called ATIS, which is the frequency where you get the weather and so on. This down below it here is the so-called transponder. And the transponder is the old method of giving you information like altitude and so on. This number right here is a number that identifies your airplane to air traffic control, and they will tell you what they want that to be. So you make that change by putting that in here, and that way air traffic controls now knows what aircraft you are. It could be any arbitrary number, 3, 5, 6, 7, and it will show up on their radar as 3, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and every so often, if they hand you to another air traffic area, they'll give you a different number, and you put that in there. This information is combined with GPS information as for location and sent out via ADSB. This right here is a, it's very old, era 2007. The company is still in business, but they make fish finders now. KAJZ is our airport. Okay, and there's the runways 3 and 21. And this actually works, although my flight instructor and I haven't figured it out yet. This needs to be replaced with a much more modern Garmin or something like that. Okay, now we've got engine stuff over here. Let's give you the RPM, cylinder head temp on one side, cylinder head temp on the other, the hottest cylinder, which is the ones on the back. This is the so-called Hobbs meter. This meter right here tells you how many hours the airplane has had its engine on. When you turn on the engine, it turns this on. If the engine goes off, it turns that off. And that reason, you know how many hours you actually have on the engine. It is also common in the industry that you pay a flight instructor based on the number of Hobbs hours that you get. So you may do all sorts of preliminary stuff, you may yak for a while after the flight, but none of that counts. This right here is the oil pressure, and as soon as you start the engine, you have to check the oil pressure. Make sure it comes up to oil temperature. You want to see that off the bottom before you fly. The ammeter, for some reason, is wired in here wrong, and I've got to go find out what the previous owner did there, get that fixed. The voltmeter works fine. Now these are your switches, cabin lights, there aren't any. Autopilot, that goes into there and you can hear we're up, but it's not actually connected to anything. The navigation lights, the alternator field, the panel lights, which don't come on because there aren't any. Strobe, which is on the tips of the wings, and that does come on. And these are the landing lights, but there are no landing lights because a sport aircraft flies only during the daytime. So here we have the throttle. This is very strange to me, and I've always had trouble with it. All the way out means no throttle. All the way in means full throttle. And by the way, this does not pump gas into the engine. This is the carburetor heat. It heats up the carburetor so that if there's ice forming in there, it can melt it. Okay. Now I mentioned to you about the trim tab. This is the trim tab right here. Takes a lot of turning to get it to do much. You have cabin heat. These are some of your breakers down here. 12 volts. I need to put in a couple more of those. And I think that covers all of the controls. On this particular unit, a lot of units, turning the key to off shorts the magnetos and they turn the engine off. On this one, all the switch does is hit the starter motor, and you have to have the magnetos on already. And then this up here, this big switch, is the main power for the thing. This right here, this little instrument is interesting. See how it says 37 seconds it's going to shut down? It actually has a 4-hour battery in there. And if for some reason you lose power, your GPS thing here will continue to work. Now, this does not give you a direction like a GPS was, but you can get the true track off of it. It's got 99% battery. Let's see. This right here is the tilt. This is the horizon. And this right here, right where that point is, says that we're pointed slightly above the horizon because we are. Tail sitting down. Okay? And then this gives you your altitude over here, your climb rate. There's a lot of instruments wrapped up into one. The problem for me is it's too small. And so I use this airspeed indicator over here, use this for altitude, use this for climb and stuff like that. And then actually, most of the time, I use this as my heading indicator because I can see the heading there very easily. Okay, well, that gives you a little tour of the aircraft. Now, I want you to understand I am a student and I am not giving instruction. I am telling you what I'm learning. And so if you have a question about your aircraft, contact your instructor and take direction from him or her in what to do. Also, there are a number of outstanding FAA written handbooks. There's the Aircraft Flying Handbook by the FAA and the Aeronautical Handbook of Pilot's Knowledge or something like that, that talks about everything but the airplane and tells you all the things you need to know for air traffic control and things like that. So I'm going to turn that off. And it's off. So there you go. Help me feed the algorithm on YouTube by subscribing. Also, please comment on what you think of this and let me know if there's anything you'd like me to explore further. And until we next meet, 73.